Welcome back to Air Quality Matters and One Take. One Take, my take on a paper or report on air quality, ventilation and the built environment. One Take in that it's, in one take and tries to summarise for you a scientific perspective on something interesting in, usually 10 minutes or less, because who has the time to read all these amazing documents, right? This week, we're diving into a really fascinating paper published in the Journal of Building and Environment, titled The Impact of Indoor Environmental Quality on Tourist Accommodation Ratings Using Guest Reviews. It's authored by Fan Zhang and colleagues from Griffith University and the University of New South Wales, plus a few other international institutions. We talk a lot on this podcast about homes, schools and offices, but what about hotels and service departments? Think about it. When we travel, we're basically putting our health, comfort and well-being into the hands of a complete stranger's building for a few days or even a few weeks. The hospitality sector typically obsesses over traditional service attributes. They care about the attitude of staff at the front desk, don't they? The quality of the food, the location and the price. But the actual physical environmental conditions, the indoor air quality, the acoustics and thermal comfort, often get completely overlooked as drivers of a guest's overall experience. And I'll be honest with you, measuring this stuff in hotels has historically been a bit of a nightmare. Traditionally, if you want to know what occupants think of a building, you do a post-occupancy evaluation or a POE. You hand out structured surveys. But try getting a business traveller who is rushing to an airport at 6 a.m. in the morning to sit down and fill in a 20-page questionnaire about the building's ventilation rates. It's just not going to happen. Guests are transient. Their stays are often short, and getting that feedback at scale is practically impossible. So what these researchers did instead is actually quite brilliant. They leaned into the digital age. They used web mining and artificial intelligence, specifically natural language processing, to scrape and analyse over 500,000 bookings.com reviews from Australian hotels and service departments. We are talking about extracting the actual unprompted words from guests who have stayed in these places to see exactly what they care about. To make sense of all this data, the researchers applied something called three-factor theory. Now, stick with me here because this is a really interesting framework to understand how we all perceive buildings in this sense. The theory basically categorizes any product or service feature into one of three buckets. Bucket one is what they call basic factors or dissatisfiers. These are your absolute minimum expectations. If a hotel doesn't have these, you are furious and you leave a terrible review. But, and this is the kicker, if the hotel does have them, you don't really care. It doesn't make you actively happy, you just expect it to be there. Bucket number two contains performance factors. This is a straight line. The better the performance, the happier you are. The worse the performance, the unhappier you are. And bucket number three holds the excitement factors. These are the unexpected bonuses. If they aren't there, you aren't mad because you didn't expect them in the first place. But if they are there, your satisfaction goes through the roof. So the researchers fed all these hundreds of thousands of reviews into their AI to see where indoor environmental quality, things like temperature, air quality, lighting and noise, actually fell. And the results are pretty eye-opening. It turns out that almost all indoor environmental quality factors function purely as basic factors. Thermal comfort, indoor air quality and luminous environment, acoustics, the amount of space and cleanliness. Guests just expect them to be good. If a hotel gets these things wrong, the guests will absolutely punish them in the online ratings. But if the hotel provides perfectly clean, fresh air and a quiet room, nobody is rushing to the internet to write a glowing 5-star review just for that. They consider it an absolute bare minimum for what they paid for. When the researchers looked which specific failures dragged accommodation ratings down into deep doo-doo, three things stood out above the rest. poor cleanliness, poor indoor air quality, and bad acoustics. Think about that for a second. We talk constantly on this podcast about the health impacts of poor ventilation. But here we see the brutal commercial reality of it. Stuffy rooms, musty smells, and hearing the elevator rattling through the walls all night are directly torching hotel revenues by driving down their public ratings. There was one really interesting exception in the data though, and that was the exterior view. The researchers found that in budget accommodation, your 3-star hotels and below, a nice view actually was an excitement factor. People didn't expect it, so when they got a nice view of the city or water, they were thrilled and bumped up their ratings. But in a luxury 5-star hotel, the view reverted to being a basic factor. If you're paying 5-star prices, you expect 5-star views, right? And if you find yourself looking at a brick wall, you're grabbing your phone to take a picture and leave a 1-star review immediately. Now, we can't talk about a data set that spans from 2019 to 2022 without talking about the elephant in the room, COVID-19. The researchers specifically looked at how the pandemic changed the narrative around indoor environments. And let's face it, we all know the pandemic changed us, but seeing it quantified in the data is something else. The pandemic drastically amplified our sensitivity to poor indoor environments. During COVID, the negative impact of poor indoor air quality and poor cleanliness on guest ratings got significantly stronger. People suddenly equated the visible cleanliness of a room and the freshness of the air with their own personal safety and survival. In transient settings like hotels, guests don't have carbon dioxide monitors in their pockets, unless you're me or several of my colleagues that constantly post about it. But anyway, they form their perception of air quality based on sensory cues like odour or stuffiness or visible dust. And during the pandemic, if a room felt stuffy or smelled stale, guests were merciless in their reviews. I think bringing all this together, the implications of this paper are pretty big, to be fair, not just for the hospitality sector, but for anyone involved in building design, operation and maintenance. The researchers found that indoor environmental quality accounts for nearly 33% of a customer's overall rating in budget hotels, and about 24% in luxury accommodation. That is a huge chunk of the pie. You can have the best marketing team in the world, the friendliest staff, and the most comfortable beds, but if your building is fundamentally underventilated, if the mechanical extract system is noisy or just simply not working, your business will suffer. It completely blows the traditional view out of the water that hotel success is only about customer service. The physical performance of the building is just as critical. The researchers even suggest that policymakers and industry leaders should start looking at implementing formal indoor environmental quality benchmarking for hotels. In Australia, they have something called the Neighbours rating for office buildings, which evaluates things like air quality and thermal comfort. Why not adapt that for hotels? Imagine a feature where you, as a consumer, can check a hotel's certified ventilation and air quality rating before you even book a room. The digital world we keep talking about isn't very far away. Now, the authors do rightly point out a few limitations to their study. Text mining with AI isn't perfect. Sometimes the algorithms misclassify a phrase here or there. They also didn't factor things like price or specific geographical location of the hotel, which obviously plays a role in how guests feels about their stay. And of course, this is based entirely on subjective online complaints rather than someone standing in a room with a powered flow hood and an air quality monitor. But honestly, in the world of hospitality, the guest perception is the reality. If they feel the air is bad as far as the hotel's bottom line is concerned. So what's the main takeaway here? For me, it's that getting engineering right, providing adequate, quiet and clean ventilation is no longer a background issue. It is a frontline, non-negotiable requirement for consumers' trust and business survival ultimately. If we are serious about the buildings we inhabit, we need to design them to perform, and we need to manage them so they keep performing. Thanks as always for listening. I do appreciate you spending time with me. If you found this breakdown helpful, do share it with someone else in the industry who needs to hear it. These podcasts are not possible without our sponsors, so thanks a million, as always, to Safe Traces and Imbiot, who make all of this possible. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again next week.